For 10 years, Malachi Brooks had seen no human soul cross his land. The footprints in the dust around his cabin were his own. The voice echoing through the canyon walls was his own. And the shadow moving past his windows each dawn belonged to him alone. Then 4 girls collapsed at his gate like broken birds, and everything he knew about solitude shattered. The first thing that struck him wasn't their torn dresses or their bare feet. It was how they fell in perfect unison, as if some invisible force had cut their strings simultaneously. Malachi stood frozen on his porch, coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips, watching 4 bodies crumple against his wooden gate like autumn leaves surrendering to gravity. The morning had started like every other for the past decade. He'd risen before dawn, checked his water supply, and settled into his routine of watching the horizon for threats that never came. His nearest neighbor lived 3 days' hard ride away. The trading post was a week's journey. This land existed in a pocket of the world where civilization forgot to reach, exactly as he'd planned it. But now 4 strangers lay motionless in his dust, and the careful walls he'd built around his solitude began to crack. Malachi set down his coffee and approached cautiously. The girls looked young, maybe between 12 and 18, with long black hair spread like ink stains across the parched earth. Their clothes were native-made but torn, as if they'd been running through thorns. Each one clutched something in her closed fist. The eldest girl stirred first, her eyes fluttering open to reveal a gaze both fierce and terrified. When she saw Malachi standing over them, she tried to scramble backward, but her body betrayed her with weakness. "Water," she whispered, the word cracking like dried leather. Malachi glanced at the other 3 girls, still unconscious, then back at the one watching him with desperate eyes. In 10 years, these were the first words spoken to him by another human being. The sound felt foreign, almost sacred. He fetched water from his well, his mind racing with questions he hadn't needed to ask in a decade. Where had they come from? How had they found his hidden valley? And why did each girl grip something so tightly in her hand that not even unconsciousness could make her let go? As he knelt beside them with the water, the eldest girl grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Her touch was ice-cold despite the morning heat. "They're coming," she breathed, her eyes scanning the horizon behind him. "We couldn't stop them. They have what we couldn't give." But before Malachi could ask what she meant, the sound of distant hoofbeats began echoing through the canyon walls. The hoofbeats grew louder, multiplying like thunder rolling through the narrow canyon walls. Malachi counted at least 6 horses, maybe more, moving fast and with purpose. These weren't travelers who'd stumbled upon his valley by accident. "Get them inside," the eldest girl whispered, struggling to sit up. Her sisters remained unconscious, their breathing shallow and labored. "If they see us here, we're all dead." Malachi had spent 10 years avoiding exactly this kind of trouble. His isolation wasn't just preference, it was survival. But looking down at 4 exhausted girls who couldn't run another step, he felt something he'd buried a decade ago stirring in his chest. He scooped up the smallest girl, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. Her fist remained clenched around whatever she carried, and her skin burned with fever. The eldest girl tried to lift one of her sisters, but collapsed from the effort. "I can't leave them," she gasped, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "You won't have to," Malachi heard himself say, the words foreign on his tongue. He'd forgotten how it felt to make promises to other people. Working quickly, he carried each unconscious girl into his cabin while the eldest one limped behind him, constantly looking over her shoulder. The sound of approaching horses echoed off the canyon walls like a countdown to disaster. His one-room cabin had been built for solitude, not sanctuary. A single bed, a wood-burning stove, shelves lined with preserves and ammunition. No place to hide 4 people from whoever was hunting them. "The root cellar," Malachi muttered, pulling aside a worn rug to reveal a trapdoor. He'd dug it years ago to store supplies through winter, never imagining it might hide human lives. The space below was cramped and dark, but it would have to do. He lowered the unconscious girls first, then helped the eldest one down. She paused at the edge, her eyes meeting his. "Your name," she said urgently. "I need to know your name." "Malachi Brooks. I'm Ayanna. If something happens to me, protect them. They're not just my sisters. They're the last ones who know." "Know what?" Before she could answer, the hoofbeats reached his gate. Malachi dropped the trapdoor and threw the rug over it, just as heavy fists began pounding on his cabin door. "Open up!" a voice commanded, rough and impatient. "We're tracking 4 runaways. They came this way." Malachi smoothed the rug with his boot and walked to the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the gap in the wood, he could see at least 7 men on horseback, all armed, all scanning his property with the methodical attention of professional hunters. The leader dismounted and approached the door. When he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of authority that came from never being told no. "We know they're here, old man. Question is whether you're going to cooperate or become part of the problem." Malachi opened the door just wide enough to step outside, keeping his body blocking the entrance. The leader stood 3 feet away, close enough that Malachi could smell tobacco and sweat on his clothes. The man's eyes were cold gray, the kind that had seen violence and felt nothing. "Haven't seen anyone," Malachi said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. "Been alone out here for years." The leader studied him for a long moment, then gestured to his men. They began spreading out across the property, checking as well, his shed, circling the cabin like wolves surrounding prey. "Name's Clayton Morse," the leader said, never taking his eyes off Malachi. "I track people for a living. Good at it too. These 4 girls I'm looking for, they stole something valuable from their tribal council. Something that doesn't belong to them." Malachi kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. Ayanna had said her sisters were the last ones who knew something. Now this man claimed they were thieves. Someone was lying. "Like I said, haven't seen anyone." Clayton stepped closer, his hand resting casually on the grip of his pistol. "See? That's interesting. Because their tracks lead right to your gate, clear as daylight in the dust. 4 sets of bare feet moving slow, like they were tired. Real tired." One of Clayton's men called out from near the well. "Boss, got something here." He held up a torn piece of fabric, the same color as the dress Ayanna wore. Malachi's throat went dry. Clayton smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Old man, where are they?" Before Malachi could answer, a sound came from beneath the cabin floor, faint, but unmistakable. One of the unconscious girls was stirring, shifting in the cramped cellar space. Clayton's head tilted like a hunting dog catching a scent. "What was that?" "Rats," Malachi said quickly. "Place is full of them." But Clayton was already pushing past him, stepping into the cabin. His men followed, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Malachi's heart sank as he watched Clayton's eyes sweep the small space, taking in every detail. "Funny thing about tracking people," Clayton said, walking slowly around the room. "You learn to read signs most folks miss. Like how this dust on your floor has been disturbed, recent-like, and how there's drops of water here by this rug, even though your bucket's bone dry." Clayton knelt and lifted the edge of the rug, revealing the outline of the trapdoor beneath. He looked up at Malachi with those cold gray eyes. "Rats, you said?" Before Malachi could react, Clayton yanked the trapdoor open. The sight below made him whistle low and appreciative. "Well, well, 4 little rats indeed." Ayanna's voice rose from the cellar, defiant despite her weakness. "We're not going back, Clayton. You can't make us." "Oh, I think I can," Clayton replied, his hand moving to his gun. "Question is whether your new friend here dies trying to stop me." That's when Malachi noticed something that changed everything. The small metal badge pinned inside Clayton's vest, partially hidden, but unmistakable. This wasn't just a tracker hunting runaways. This was something much worse. The badge bore the seal of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Malachi's blood turned to ice. This wasn't about stolen property or runaway girls. This was government business, and that made Clayton infinitely more dangerous than any common tracker. "You're federal," Malachi said, his voice barely above a whisper. Clayton's smile widened. "Smart man. Makes this easier." He gestured to his men, who immediately drew their weapons. "These girls are wanted for violation of federal relocation orders. They were supposed to be on a transport to the Oklahoma territories 3 days ago." Ayanna's voice rose from the cellar, desperate and fierce. "Tell him the truth, Clayton. Tell him what you really want." "Shut your mouth," Clayton snapped, but Ayanna continued. "They want what our grandmother told us, the location of the sacred burial grounds. They want to dig up our ancestors for the gold underneath." Clayton's jaw tightened. "The land belongs to the government now, any mineral rights included. These girls are the last living members of their tribe who know the exact location. Once they're relocated, the information dies with them." Malachi felt sick. He'd heard rumors about government agents forcing tribes to reveal sacred sites for mining operations, but seeing it firsthand was different. These weren't criminals or thieves. They were the last guardians of their people's final resting place. The papers are all legal, Clayton continued, pulling a folded document from his vest. Signed by the territorial governor himself. You're interfering with federal law by harboring them. One of Clayton's men stepped closer to the cellar opening. Want me to bring them up, boss? Carefully, Clayton warned. They're no good to us dead. But as the man reached down into the cellar, Ayanna grabbed his wrist and bit down hard. The man screamed and jerked backward, blood streaming from his hand. The distraction was exactly what Malachi needed. He dove for his rifle leaning against the cabin wall. But Clayton was faster. The federal agent's pistol cleared leather before Malachi's fingers touched wood. Don't be a hero, old man. This doesn't have to involve you. Malachi froze, his hand inches from his weapon. Below in the cellar, he could hear the other girls beginning to stir, their voices weak but growing stronger. They were waking up, and when they did, they'd be terrified. Here's what's going to happen, Clayton said, his gun trained on Malachi's chest. You're going to step away from that rifle. My men are going to collect the girls, and you're going to forget we were ever here. And if I refuse? Clayton's expression didn't change. Then you'll be listed as a hostile who resisted federal agents in the line of duty. Your body will be found weeks from now, and nobody will question what happened to a hermit living this far from civilization. Malachi looked down at the cellar where 4 innocent girls waited for him to decide their fate. Then he looked at Clayton's cold gray eyes and realized something that changed everything about his decision. In that federal badge, in those legal papers, in Clayton's confident threats, Malachi saw the same authority that had driven him into isolation 10 years ago. The same power that had destroyed his life once before. 10 years ago, Malachi Brooks had worn a badge just like Clayton's. He'd served as a territorial marshal, believing he was bringing order to lawless lands, until the day he'd received orders to clear out a peaceful native settlement for a railroad company. When he'd refused, claiming the families posed no threat, his superiors had branded him a traitor to federal interests. They'd stripped his badge, destroyed his reputation, and made sure he'd never work in law enforcement again. Now, staring down Clayton's barrel, those memories crashed over him like a flood. The faces of the families he'd failed to protect, the children who'd been forced from their homes, the promise he'd made to himself that he'd never let authority crush innocence again. I know what you're thinking, Clayton said, reading something in Malachi's expression. You're wondering if you can reach that rifle before I put a bullet in you. The answer is no. But Malachi wasn't thinking about the rifle anymore. He was thinking about the oil lamp sitting on his shelf, just within arm's reach. About how quickly flames spread through dry wood. About how federal agents valued their own lives more than completing difficult missions. Tell me something, Clayton, Malachi said, his voice steady. How much is the government paying you for this? Because I'm betting it's not enough to die for. Clayton's eyes narrowed. You don't scare me, old man. Maybe not, but fire should. In one fluid motion, Malachi grabbed the oil lamp and hurled it against the cabin wall. Glass shattered, oil splashed across the dry wooden beams, and within seconds, flames began licking up toward the roof. Clayton cursed and dove backward as fire spread across the wall behind him. His men scrambled away from the sudden heat, giving Malachi the opening he needed. He lunged for his rifle, rolled behind his overturned table, and came up firing. The first shot took down the agent nearest the cellar opening. The second sent Clayton diving for cover behind Malachi's wood stove. Return fire erupted immediately, bullets splintering the wood around him. Get the girls, Clayton shouted over the gunfire. Don't let them burn. But Ayanna was already climbing out of the cellar, her unconscious sisters draped over her shoulders with strength that defied her exhaustion. Smoke filled the cabin as flames consumed the walls, creating a gray haze that made targeting difficult. This way, Malachi called, firing 2 more shots to keep Clayton's men back. He kicked open his back window and helped Ayanna push her sisters through the opening. As they escaped into the smoke-filled canyon air, Malachi heard Clayton's voice roaring behind them. Burn them out! I want those girls alive! The federal agents poured out of the burning cabin, spreading out to surround the area behind it. But Malachi knew this canyon better than any outsider ever could. He'd spent 10 years learning every rock, every hiding place, every escape route. What he hadn't counted on was Ayanna grabbing his arm as they ran. There's something you need to know, she gasped, supporting one of her stirring sisters. Clayton doesn't just want the burial ground location. He wants us alive because we're the only ones who can read the markers. The burial sites are marked in our language, in symbols only we understand. Meaning if we die, the secret dies with us. But if we live, she looked back at the burning cabin where Clayton's men were regrouping. If we live, he'll never stop hunting us. The canyon offered a maze of narrow passages and hidden alcoves, but it also meant limited escape routes. Malachi led the girls deeper into the rock formations, their footsteps echoing off stone walls that seemed to amplify every sound. Behind them, he could hear Clayton's men spreading out, their voices carrying on the desert wind. The second sister, barely 16, finally stirred in Ayanna's arms. Her eyes opened wide with terror until she saw her sister's face. "Nayeli," Ayanna whispered. "Stay quiet. We're still running." But Nayeli looked past her sister to Malachi, and something in her expression made him pause. She opened her clenched fist for the first time, revealing a small piece of carved bone covered in intricate symbols. "He has to know," Nayeli whispered, her voice hoarse. "If something happens to us, someone has to know the truth." Ayanna shook her head frantically. "Not now. Not here." "What truth?" Malachi asked, still carrying the youngest sister while keeping watch for pursuing agents. Nayeli ignored her sister's warning. "The burial ground Clayton wants? It's not just our ancestors buried there. It's where the government buried evidence 20 years ago. Documents, records of what they did to our people." Malachi's blood ran cold. "What kind of documents?" "Orders to poison water supplies, lists of children taken for medical experiments, financial records showing how much money federal agents made selling our people as forced labor." Nayeli's voice grew stronger with each word. "Our grandmother hid copies before they killed her. That's what they really want, not gold. The evidence that could destroy careers, end reputations, maybe even hang politicians." The sound of approaching boots echoed through the canyon. Clayton's voice carried over the rocks, closer than before. "I know you can hear me, old man. You're only making this harder on yourself." Malachi processed Nayeli's revelation as they moved deeper into the canyon. This wasn't about mining rights or territorial disputes. This was about covering up genocide. Clayton wasn't just a federal agent following orders. He was part of a conspiracy that reached all the way to territorial capitals. The third sister began to wake, her eyes fluttering open. But instead of relief, Malachi saw fresh terror in her face as she looked around at the narrow canyon walls. "We can't go deeper," she whispered urgently. "This path leads to the dead end. I remember from when we came through yesterday." Malachi's heart sank. In his rush to escape Clayton's men, he'd led them into a trap. The canyon walls rose 50 feet on either side, too steep to climb. The passage ahead narrowed to barely shoulder width before ending at a solid rock face. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Clayton's men were methodically checking every hiding spot, and they'd reach this passage within minutes. "There's another way," Ayanna said suddenly. "The hidden path our grandmother showed us. But it requires crossing the canyon floor where they'll see us." Malachi looked back toward the sound of approaching boots, then forward at the narrowing walls that offered no escape. They had perhaps 2 minutes before Clayton's men found them. "How many of them would see us cross?" he asked. "All of them," Ayanna admitted. "And they'd have clear shots for almost 30 seconds. The youngest sister stirred in Malachi's arms, her fever breaking as consciousness returned. When she opened her eyes and saw his face, she spoke in a voice that made his decision for him. "Are you going to save us?" Clayton's voice echoed off the canyon walls, much closer now. "End of the line. Come out now and nobody else dies." Malachi looked down at 4 girls who carried secrets worth killing for, then back at the narrow passage that offered no escape. In his 10 years of isolation, he'd avoided every difficult choice that came his way. Now, with nowhere left to run, he finally understood why fate had brought them to his gate. Malachi looked down at the youngest girl's trusting eyes and felt something shift inside him. For 10 years he'd chosen isolation over courage, safety over responsibility, but not today. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm going to save you." He set the youngest sister down gently and checked his rifle. 4 shots left. Against 7 armed federal agents, it wasn't nearly enough. But sometimes winning wasn't about superior firepower. Sometimes it was about superior knowledge. "Ayanna, show me exactly where this hidden path starts." She pointed to a section of canyon wall that looked identical to every other section. "There, where the rock changes color slightly." "But Malachi, they'll see us the moment we step into the open, not if they're looking somewhere else." Malachi studied the canyon layout, remembering details from his years of solitude, the echo patterns, The way sound bounced off different rock formations, the blind spots created by jutting stone shelves. "Listen carefully," he told the girls. "When I give the signal, you run for that path. Don't look back. Don't hesitate, just run. I'll buy you the time you need." "You'll die," Nayeli said bluntly. "Maybe, but if I don't try, we all die anyway." Clayton's voice echoed closer now, maybe 50 yards away. "I can smell the smoke on you. Come out now and I'll make it quick." Malachi positioned himself behind a boulder that offered cover, while still giving him a clear view of the canyon floor. The girls huddled together, ready to run on his signal. "One more thing," Ayanna whispered urgently. "The evidence our grandmother hid. It's not just documents. There are photographs, pictures of what they did to children in the schools. If those ever see daylight, they will," Malachi promised. "Now go." He stepped out from behind the boulder and fired his first shot high into the air, letting the sound echo off the canyon walls to confuse its source. Immediately, shouts erupted from multiple directions as Clayton's men tried to triangulate his position. The girls broke from cover and ran for the hidden path, their bare feet silent on the stone. Malachi fired his second shot toward the main group of agents, forcing them to take cover behind rocks. "There! Northeast wall!" Clayton's voice commanded. "Take him down!" Return fire erupted from 3 different positions, bullets ricocheting off rocks around Malachi's position. He used his third shot to target the agent with the clearest angle on the girls, catching the man in the shoulder and spinning him away from his rifle. But the distraction cost him. Clayton had circled wide during the gunfire, appearing on a ledge above Malachi's position with a clear shot down. "Drop the rifle," Clayton commanded. "Last warning." Malachi had 1 bullet left, and no clear shot at Clayton without exposing himself to the other agents. The girls were halfway to the hidden path, but they needed more time. "Tell me something, Clayton," Malachi called out, not moving from his cover. "How many federal agents know what you're really doing out here? How many are in on the cover-up? Enough to make sure this story never gets told. What if it already has been told?" Clayton's confident expression faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" Malachi smiled grimly. "You think I've been hiding in this canyon for 10 years without making friends? There's a telegraph operator in Cedar Ridge who receives my supply requests. Told him some interesting stories this morning about federal agents hunting innocent girls. It was a bluff, but it worked." Clayton's face twisted with fury, and in that moment of distraction, he shifted position just enough to expose his shooting arm. Malachi used his final bullet. Clayton's scream echoed through the canyon as Malachi's bullet shattered his gun arm. The federal agent's weapon clattered down the rock face, leaving him clutching his wounded limb 40 feet above the canyon floor with no way down. The remaining agents, seeing their leader incapacitated and their quarry escaped, faced a choice between pursuing girls into unknown territory or helping their bleeding commander. Professional loyalty won. They converged on Clayton's position, abandoning the chase. Malachi didn't wait to see the outcome. He followed the girls through the hidden passage, a narrow crack between rock walls that opened into a natural corridor. The path twisted through darkness for several minutes before emerging into sunlight on the far side of the canyon system. Ayanna waited for him at the exit, her 3 sisters standing together in the desert beyond. All 4 girls were awake now, weak but determined. The youngest still clutched her carved bone marker, while the others held similar pieces. Together, the artifacts formed a map that could lead to the most damaging evidence against the federal government in decades. "It's over," Malachi said, checking behind them for pursuit. "Clayton's finished and his men won't follow us through that passage." "No," Ayanna replied quietly. "It's just beginning. Now we have to decide what to do with what we know." The girls gathered around Malachi as he considered their options. They could disappear into the wilderness, taking their secrets with them. They could seek protection from other tribes, or they could do something that would honor their grandmother's sacrifice. "There's a newspaper editor in Santa Fe," Malachi said finally. "Man named Richardson. He's been investigating territorial corruption for years. If we can get these documents and photographs to him, the evidence could bring down half the territorial government," Nayeli finished. "But they'll hunt us forever for exposing them." Malachi looked at each girl in turn, seeing not helpless refugees but survivors carrying the weight of justice. His 10 years of isolation had ended the moment they collapsed at his gate. There was no going back to solitude, no returning to the safety of anonymity. "Then we make sure the hunt ends with us," he said. "Richardson has connections in Washington, federal marshals who aren't bought and paid for. If we do this right, we don't just expose the corruption, we destroy it completely. 3 months later, the territorial governor resigned in disgrace. 4 federal agents faced trial for conspiracy. The Bureau of Indian Affairs underwent complete reorganization, and the story of 4 brave sisters who preserved evidence of genocide became front-page news across the nation. Malachi Brooks never returned to his isolated canyon. Instead, he settled near Santa Fe, where he ran a small ranch that served as a safe haven for displaced tribal families. Ayanna and her sisters lived there too, working with journalists and federal investigators to ensure that other atrocities never remained hidden. Every morning, Malachi would look out at the sunrise over the mountains and remember the day 4 girls collapsed at his gate. He'd chosen solitude once, believing it meant safety. Now he understood that safety without purpose was just another form of death. The carved bone markers were eventually donated to a museum, their secrets having served their purpose. But the real marker of change was simpler: a small ranch where 4 sisters grew up free, and where a lonely man learned that courage wasn't about facing danger alone. It was about choosing to stand with others when everything was at stake. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where ordinary people face extraordinary choices that define their character. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.